All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our CG Spectrum event, our discussion with retired Rear Admiral Alan Steinman on Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the lasting legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and other Coast Guard policy that affects the LGBTQ plus community. Mr. Steinman retired from the Coast Guard in 1997, and afterwards in 2003 was one of the first 3 flag officers to come out publicly as gay, and spent a decade fighting for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So Mr. Steinman, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with me and give us all some insight. If anybody watching has questions, if you're on the Facebook page or on the YouTube page, you can just put your questions right in the comments. We do have somebody monitoring, and we'll have a couple minutes at the end for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So we do have a moderator who is taking those questions down. Any questions that we don't get to, we will post on the Facebook page. Mr. Steinman has said that he is definitely willing to answer those questions and just type them out for us. So with that, sir, do you want to give us a little bit about your background?
Well, thank you, Derek. Let me just say it's a pleasure to be here to address your members of Spectrum. And I must say with great admiration that you're able to pull off this organization. You are the only military-wide LGBT organization that's officially endorsed by a branch of the military. So congratulations to all of you for making that happen. That's pretty amazing. Choked up about that. So whatever thought we'd see the day. So, okay, a little bit about me. Of course, I joined the Coast Guard back in '72, kind of ancient history. And of course, I was in the closet the entire time I was in the Coast Guard. In fact, I was in the closet, deep in the closet. So I had actually no sexual activity at all the whole time I was in the Coast Guard. So that's how bad it was for those of us in the Coast Guard, in the military, so to speak. But so I was, as soon as I got in the Coast Guard, I went to flight surgeon school. I was a flight surgeon at Port Angeles and Astoria and North Bend and a little bit at Kodiak. And then I ended up a long time at Coast Guard headquarters in various jobs in health and safety, also in the operations search and rescue division. And then ultimately was fortunate enough to be selected as the director of health and safety. I'm not sure what they call that these days, but the equivalent of the Surgeon General and the other branches of the military. And there's a lot of interesting stories that go in the background of that too, but I don't want to belabor that. But and I was, to the topic at hand, excuse me, I was a rookie admiral at the time the Don't Ask, Don't Tell issue came up in 1993 or 92, really. And let me back up a little bit, just a little bit of history for those who aren't aware of what happened. So, of course, prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, gays and lesbians were just absolutely banned from serving at all. Not only were banned from serving, but there was at the time a UCMJ article on sodomy that basically made any form of sex outside of vaginal intercourse between a man and a woman a violation of military law.
Really?
So I think they've modified that since, but that was still in force at the time that Don't Ask, Don't Tell came up. So gays were absolutely banned. Then President Clinton, while he was running for his first term for president in 1992, addressed a large gathering of the LGBT community, I believe it's in Los Angeles, and promised that he would reverse the ban and allow gays and lesbians to serve openly. He was, of course, we in the gay community were delighted with that.
Right.
But he was naive in terms of politics in Washington, D.C. and federal politics, because, of course, he was only a governor before that. So he was unaware of what the military's attitude was going to be. So when he attempted to do that right away, as soon as he was inaugurated, he ran into a huge buzzsaw of opposition. And it's important to remember that Congress was entirely Democratic controlled at that time. That was split Congress. So here he was, you had a Democratic president, a Democratic House of Representatives, a Democratic majority in the Senate, and yet here was this opposition. So you had conservative House members, conservative senators from the Democratic Party opposed to allowing gays and lesbians to serve openly. Of course, you had the Republican Party was opposed to it. And you had the entire chaplain corps of the military was opposed to it. You had the evangelical Christians in the United States and the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church opposed to it. So you had this massive amount of opposition to what the president was trying to do. Why? Why was there this opposition? Well, I'm not sure we even advanced much since then, but of course, society's view of gays and lesbians, and let me just make an emphasis on the gay part of it, because the military was at that time and still predominantly a male organization. We've certainly gotten better in that regard, but it was predominantly men. So as you grow up a boy in our society, you learn that being gay is the worst thing you can possibly be. So that's what the background is for almost everybody in the military. And as you said, when you and I were chatting before our conference here, it still goes on, even now in the Coast Guard with Don't Ask, Don't Tell being gone. But so you had the stereotype of a gay man that was imbued in people's minds, particularly in the Pentagon. What is that stereotype? Somebody who's weak, somebody who's effeminate, somebody who's promiscuous, predatory, sexual transmitted diseases. All of these stereotypes were prevalent and caused, of course, the military to just recoil in horror at the idea that gays and lesbians could serve. And of course, the corollary to that stereotype is that gays can't be warriors.
Sure.
So in the military is a warrior culture, and so gays, is the direct opposite of that, according to the stereotype. And then you have the shower issue. And the shower issue is one of privacy, but the shower issue is kind of a silly thing, but it is incredibly strong and incredibly important in this story. But no one's going to talk about it. The people who oppose gays and lesbians in the military were hung up on the shower issue. The shower issue being a straight guy is fearful of a gay guy in the shower is going to look at him or worse.
Right.
Approach him sexually or do something. So, but of course you can't talk about the shower issue because it's stupid to talk about in public, and it's certainly stupid to base your policy on that.
Right.
So that's not what they did. They claimed that the basis of Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a mere knowledge of a gay person in a unit would be so abhorrent to the straight peers that it would destroy unit morale, destroy unit cohesion, and negatively impact combat readiness. Unit morale, unit cohesion, and combat readiness. So that was the watchwords. And that's the way the law was written. So there's a little Coast Guard connection to this too, in kind of a negative way, not as an organization, but the leading opponent of gays serving in the military at the time was the chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, Senator Sam Nunn from Georgia. Sam Nunn was a Coastie at one time in his life. So I'm sad to say that there was that negative Coast Guard connotation. He since has changed his mind, which is nice to know. But that was the story. And he was a tiger on the issue. And he just really ran with this thing. It's conceivable that President Clinton could have issued an executive order because the prohibition on gays and lesbians serving openly was simply a regulation in the DOD.
Sure.
The president can sign that, as he could change that, as we've seen current commander-in-chief do with transgender members.
Yes.
He could have done that. Senator Nunn, however, threatened him that if he did that, he would pass a law forbidding gays and lesbians from serving at all, and he had the votes to override a veto. Wow. No one knows whether he really had those votes or not. Certainly, President Truman didn't worry about that when he integrated the military by the stroke of a pen,
Sure.
by executive order. But Clinton didn't feel strong enough to test it.
Sure.
So what happened was you had this so-called compromise. Gays and lesbians could serve in the military as long as they were silent, celibate, and invisible.
Sure.
Those are my words, not those don't appear in the law. But that's basically the impact of it. You had to be silent, celibate, and invisible. Why silent? Well, you couldn't tell, and don't tell was interpreted extremely broadly.
Mm.
Don't tell in any way, shape, or form anyone at any time. Not your mother, not your relatives. Nobody could know that you were gay. Not, if you put it in a letter or an email, that was considered telling. If you went to a gay bar, that sometimes was considered telling. So telling was extremely broadly interpreted, which was different than what President Clinton understood was going to happen. He was sold a bill of goods that wasn't going to be that bad. Senator Nunn, however, knew exactly what he was doing.
Sure.
And if you look in the wording of the law, you'll see it very, very strictly defined. So telling was extremely broadly, and they did ask. The don't ask part was not really officially enforced, so you still had that problem. And so as soon as don't ask, don't tell was passed as a law, and by the way, let me step aside here for a second, because they made it a law instead of just a regulation.
Sure.
It became incredibly difficult to change.
Sure.
Changing a law means you have to get both houses of Congress, a majority in both houses of Congress, to go along with it, and the president to sign it, and you have to have a big enough majority in both houses to overcome presidential veto. So making it a law was a horrendous setback for those of us who were hoping that gays and lesbians could serve openly in the military. So we ended up with this law, don't ask, don't tell. As soon as the law went into effect, the military busily went around trying to root out gays and lesbians. And you had this huge spike in discharges under don't ask, don't tell of both men and women, and sometimes even straight women. And women, by the way, were disproportionately affected by this law. There were twice as many women discharged under don't ask, don't tell as their population in the military, as a proportion in the military. And as I said, even straight women were affected. Guys would, a guy would ask a woman out on a date. If she turned him down,
Sure.
he claimed she was a lesbian. And so you had no defense. I mean, how do you defend yourself against that?
Sure.
You have to prove that you're not. And it's almost impossible to do. So that's where we ended up in 1993 when the law went into effect. So that's a little bit of background on the history. So what was I doing at that time? Well, as I said, I was a rookie admiral at the time. And every Wednesday in Coast Guard headquarters, the flag officers and the senior executive service, the head of all the departments, would get together with the commandant, vice commandant, chief staff, and to discuss the issues of the day. The day this came up, Admiral Keim was the commandant, and he's the one who appointed me to my job. He brought it up, and I had naively thought that the Coast Guard, not being in the Defense Department, might be able to do this, might be able to allow gays and lesbians to serve, since we're in the Department of Transportation, not under the Pentagon.
Sure.
But so when Admiral Keim brought up the topic, there wasn't much discussion. He pounded his fist on the table and said, "We will be in lockstep with the military on this issue."
Wow.
So there was no discussion really about whether the Coast Guard would do anything different. Now, thinking about it rationally, the Coast Guard has always treasured its military affiliation, has always treasured its status as one of the armed forces. So, of course, they were not going to go their own way on this issue. Not to mention that there might have been budgetary ramifications from the conservative senators or House members who controlled their budget had we done something like that. But So the commandant said, we will be in lockstep with the military on this issue. But immediately after that, there's the good news of this. He said, what about our civilian employees? And of course, there's no reason to do anything against our civilian employees. So he directed the chief of personnel to write new regulations in the civilian personnel manual that said there would be no restrictions on gays and lesbians in our civilian personnel. And we became the first federal agency to do that.
Wow.
Let alone federal military agency, the first federal agency to do that. So I was very proud of the Coast Guard for that. So the bad news was we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The good news was, for the very first time, theoretically, gays and lesbians could now serve in the military.
Sure.
Before we could not, and now we could. But we had to be silent, celibate, and invisible,
Sure.
which is an impossible task, really.
Sure.
So you had all of these people being kicked out over the next 10 years, really. And a movement began to try and change things. Because there was such Sturm und Drang about this whole issue. I mean, it was a major upheaval in society and certainly in government. Nobody wanted to touch it in government for many years. It was a done deal. And in that, excuse me, that's the way it was going to be. Excuse me. And then Clinton was replaced by President Bush. Now you have a Republican president. And so it was not going to happen under a Republican president either. So it was a long game we were playing to try and get this done. There were some significant events that happened during that. Let me back up a little bit because it's another piece of good news story here. It's a little C story. When the Pentagon was discussing whether gays and lesbians serve, the Coast Guard had a representative there. Admiral Loy, who subsequently became commandant, but at the time was chief of personnel, assigned the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Atlantic area, whose name was Vince Patton, to be the Coast Guard representative in the Pentagon. Vince is one of my friends. He's a major ally.
Really?
Oh, that's awesome. Was the Coast Guard rep there. So he was sitting at the table in the Pentagon with these other flag officers and other senior enlisted to discuss whether gays and lesbians could serve. And there had been some studies about whether gays could serve in the military or not, and they'd all found that it's not going to be a problem. But what happened in this discussion among the flag officers in the Pentagon and among the other military people here who are supposed to talk about it, they knew they had their marching orders, so they just merely dismissed all these studies. And basically we're going to go write a regulation that prohibited gays and lesbians from serving. Vince was pissed off at that. He was so pissed off that they were not even giving a chance of even having a rational discussion about it. He got up and walked out of the room.
Really?
He was ordered to come back by the general who was in charge of me, and he kept going.
Wow.
Wow,
what a move.
Yeah, so he leaves the Pentagon, he goes and he beelines it to Coast Guard headquarters to tell Admiral Loy what had happened. Meanwhile, the general in the Pentagon calls up Loy on the phone. And Loy says Admiral Loy says to Vince, don't worry about it.
Wow, really?
So yeah, so Vince walked out of that because he was so pissed off. So we didn't really have after that. I don't think he went back.
Sure.
he was going to be our guy on that committee, and it was clear to him that the committee was not going to give it a fair shake.
Sure.
A little side story for that. Okay, so there are a couple other events that happened after that. So progress is going to be very slow. Because the military has a mindset that any known gay or lesbian was going to upset combat readiness, the assumption was that there are no known gays in the military. Well, that proved to be wrong. One of the things that happened, let me back up a little. Yeah, so one of the things that happened, 9/11 came along as part of this. And when 9/11 happened, they began to look back at some of the intelligence traffic that they had were trying to interpret before 9/11 happened. they had a whole lot of intercepts in Arabic, of course, that failed to be translated. And one of those intercepts said, subsequently they found them when they translated them, "Tomorrow is 0 hour." Right? So had they translated that beforehand, maybe they would have had an inkling, something that's going to happen, but they didn't. And the reason I bring this up was because one of the controversies that happened that stirred everybody up was that the Navy found that a whole lot of their linguists at their language school in Monterey, California, were gay. And they kicked them out.
Sure.
They kicked out a whole lot of Arabic linguists out of the language school. One of them was my friend, who became my friend, Alex Nicholson, who was an Arabic linguist who speaks 4 other languages. He was kicked out. He had his heart set on being a soldier. He had already gone through Army boot camp. His grandfather was a soldier. His father was a soldier. His great-grandfather was a soldier. I mean, he comes from a military family. But what happened to Alex was when he was in one of his schools in Arizona, somebody found a letter that he had written in Portuguese, which is one of the languages he speaks. And the person who found that letter spoke Portuguese. And in the letter, there was something that revealed that Alex was gay.
Wow.
So that person turned that letter over to the command, and Alex was subsequently kicked out. Did not ask, don't tell. So that's how broadly telling was, this is a private letter that Alex had that somebody found in Portuguese, not even English, and ended up him being kicked out. So he was one of the, he could speak Arabic. And yet, he was kicked out. We needed Arabic linguists at the time. So that was one of the salient events that happened. It's kind of stirred people up. Then in 2005, Aaron Belkin from the Palm Center, and if none of you know who Aaron Belkin is, I suggest you learn. Aaron was one of the unsung heroes of this whole story. Aaron was running the Palm Center, which studied the sociology of the military, among other things. Sexual minorities in the military, what their expertise was in. So Aaron commissioned a poll of Afghanistan and Iraq veterans who come back to the United States from deployment in 2005. And the poll was, a lot of general questions, but among the questions was, do you know for certain that there are gays and lesbians in your own unit?
Sure.
And I think it was 29% of the respondents from Afghanistan and Iraq War said yes.
Wow.
They knew for certain that there are gays and lesbians in their unit. And then another question said, if you didn't know for certain, do you highly suspect that there are gays and lesbians in your own unit? And another 20% said they highly suspect. So you had more than 50% of the combat veterans said that they knew for certain or suspected that there were gays and lesbians in their own unit. And these are combat veterans. Obviously, it didn't affect our combat readiness or our ability to prosecute the wars in those theaters of operation. So I looked at this poll and said, well, this is amazing. We should run with this. But but still, you were under the Bush administration, so nothing was going to happen. Let me back up a little bit. That's how my coming out story. So immediately after I retired from the Coast Guard in '97, I was appointed by President Clinton to be on a commission that looked into Gulf War illness issues. Gulf War illness was a huge problem for people who've been in the first Gulf War. And there was a major upheaval going on in the Veterans Administration and in Congress over how many veterans were sick with this syndrome. So there was a Pentagon study group appointed to look into what's going on. Clinton wanted to find out what the hell is going on with this thing. And he appointed me as part of a Senate oversight group to look at what the Pentagon was doing to make sure that they were doing a good job in investigating this. So I was immediately appointed to the Senate Oversight Committee. And so there's no way I could come out at that time. It would have been really disrespectful to the members of the committee, and it was certainly had been a huge blow up in the media, as it proved to me anyway. But at that time, it would have been really bad at that, particularly so right in the first years of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Sure.
So in 2001 or 2002, I decided I want to make a contribution to this effort of getting rid of this stupid law. So I contacted Dixon Osborne, who was the head of Service Members Legal Defense Network, which probably was, along with HRC, the lead organization in fighting Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Sure.
And basically I sent Dixon a fax saying, hey, I'm a retired admiral, I'm gay. What can I do to help? Of course, they were looking for exactly me and others of my rank to, so he said, well, wow, you can do a lot. How about going on national television and coming out on national television?
Just something little like that.
The next day, we'll fly to New York or go down, basically it was like that.
Wow.
So I said, let me think about it. So I called up my friend, one of my flag officer friends, I don't think I'll name him, who was very wise in the ways of politics. And he said, Alice, we're just mobilizing now for 9/11 and, mobilizing to get ready to go to war. If you come out now, in order to make this point, it will be seen as a major black eye to the military, and it will be the exact opposite of what you want to do. So don't do it. The problem with that was he was my friend. I'd never told him I was gay before. I'm coming out to him on the telephone while asking him whether I should do this or not. But I thought it was good advice, so I didn't do it at that time. Fast forward a couple more years now, it's 2003, and it's the 10th anniversary of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law. And now it was time to come out. So to make it easier, there were three of us, I and two Army generals, came out publicly together to a huge media turmoil. I mean, it was, I mean, and I had a partner at the time who was still active duty. He was active duty Air Force at the time. He'd gone from the Navy to the Air Force. And so I had to protect my partner, now my husband, from being discovered. So I had to keep the media away from my house, and I refused to talk about my personal life. And of course, that's all I wanted to talk about, particularly People magazine. Who did interviews with me, and it's, so it was a difficult week worth of media whirlwind. From coming out. The Coast Guard never said boo to me about it.
Really?
Yeah. I heard nothing from the Coast Guard, although I won't say who, but I was told that there was a prevailing attitude that Admiral Steinman and Vince Patton, Master Chief Patton, were a disgrace to the Coast Guard and a disgrace to this nation.
Sure, of course.
That was the word that I had heard from my inside sources. That was a little disappointing. The only time I heard anything close from the Coast Guard was the newspaper from New London, Connecticut, where the Coast Guard Academy is. The New London Day called me up as one of the media outreaches and interviewed me. And their article was neutral to negative. I think, they tried to paint the picture as I'm being disingenuous because I was calling myself a Coast Guard admiral and I really was a public health service admiral.
Sure.
That kind of spin. And that was all there was. So that was the only thing I heard from the Coast Guard about it. Although I must say that I was not, a little C story, when my successor retired from the Director of Health and Safety. It was the first female flag officer who had ever been in that position. Oh, wow. When she retired, typically her predecessors, the predecessors in that job, come to the retirement ceremony. I was not invited. Not by her. She didn't know anything about it.
Sure.
The invitation was withheld from or directed not to invite me by higher up. And wow. So I wasn't informally invited. However, I showed up anyway. as the guest of my friend, who was a flag officer who I had called earlier on to talk about coming out.
Sure.
I was his guest. And my presence was noted by the commandant, who said something very nice, welcomed me to the ceremony. I'm sure he was surprised to be there. But nonetheless, so I showed up there. That's another little side C story.
So that was 2003?
That was 2003. Okay. So, all right. So you fast forward again. We're still working on this, but President Bush is still the president. And it's not going to happen. Then President Obama gets elected. Now we have a shot. Right? We now have a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president.
Yeah.
So things began to move. And there was a bill introduced in, well, let me back up from that. I'm sorry, because before President Obama was elected, there's a couple things happened that are significant in this story. Sorry to take you back in time a little bit.
No. This is great.
Back to 2005, when this poll came out about the combat veterans. My friend Alex Nicholson, the guy who had been kicked out as an Arabic linguist from the Army, this guy's a brilliant marketer. I mean, Alex, he came up with the idea that we should go around the country and try and change people's hearts and minds and show them who really are gays in the military. It's not this horrible stereotype that they have in their mind. Right? There are regular people. I mean, regular men and women. You know, it's not a big deal. And so he called me up to see if I would assist. I would go along with this or be an advisor. And his idea was, we'll come up with a half dozen, 10 gays and lesbians who are recently out of the military to go around the country, mainly in red states, and talk to people about, just show them who we are. Talk about, don't ask, don't tell, and how it impacts us and what our roles were while we were in the military. And he called that the Call to Duty Tour, which to me was one of the most, I participated in that it was a good 6 months. That was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. It was amazing. Because we were changing hearts and minds. I mean, Alex was a brilliant marketer. So not only did we we started in New England and worked our way down into the southern states and through Texas, and then back up through Utah and then to Washington and down the west coast of California. And we started at Harvard, at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard.
Oh, wow.
And that was our coming out party.
Wow.
To a packed house at the Kennedy School of Government.
Wow.
We told our stories in front of Congressman Meehan, who had introduced a bill in the House of Representatives to repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Yes. He's from Pennsylvania. I think he was from Pennsylvania? Massachusetts. He was from Massachusetts. Yes, okay, that's right.
So he was there, and we told our stories to this, an amazing audience at Harvard, and then we began traveling around the country. There's a couple interesting stories that happened. One of them was at Georgia. There's a military school in Georgia at I think Dahlonega, Georgia, where we were booked to speak. Well, among our group, there were, some of them were two of them were combat veterans, three of them were combat veterans, one Marine and two Army combat veterans, Alex, myself, a Russian linguist, female Russian linguist. And so we were down in Georgia at this military college. And I think, to talk a little bit of homophobia, some of them arranged a marching cadence, a running cadence, to run by our group while we were standing outside. And their little cadence included the word fags in it.
Sure, of course. Very witty.
They're letting us know. So anyway, that was one little story that we gave. Another interesting thing that happened at that presentation in Georgia. One of the soldiers, Fred Fox is his name, was both enlisted and officer in the Army. And Fred had been in Somalia and the Black Hawk Down incident.
Wow.
And he'd never spoken about this before.
Wow.
I'm going to get choked up when I'm speaking about this. So Fred gets up on stage, and he didn't tell any of us this is going to happen. He told the story of what happened to him.
Wow.
Black Hawk Down. And his story was he was one of the last soldiers guarding the retreat as the soldiers are trying to get back to their base,
Yeah.
get out of this riot that there was attacking and killing them. And he heard the order. He thought he heard the order, shoot at their heads.
Wow.
And so he did, and he killed a guy. The order was really shoot over their heads, but he misheard it. So he told this story. I mean, he started crying. Because it made me start crying. And this audience in this military school is amazing. So afterwards, I took him aside and said, Fred, wow, how come you didn't tell us anybody that? And he says, it's the first time we could ever talk about it publicly.
Wow.
Whew.
Wow.
Fred was amazing. He was a really good speaker. In that movie I suggested you watch, The Astronaut, and I'll talk to the audience about that. You'll see Fred actually act Georgia. We've already some of the homophobic questions in the audience. Anyway, so that's one story, story from the tour. The other one that's even more emotional for me is we're in Tennessee at the law school in Knoxville. And we're getting set up to give our speech. And we see this mean-looking guy come in. And I had been worried about what's going to happen to us in the South. It's not like it's not like we're unadvertised. There's a group of fags, going around the country, so I had worried about that, So here comes this guy who was the personification of my worries, comes in early and sits down in the middle of the auditorium like this, staring at us.
Yeah.
So the rest of the audience fills in, and we give our talk, and then we get to the Q&A at the end, and somebody asks about the shower issue, and we address the shower issue. And the guy in the back of the room stands up, and he says, I'm an 18-year veteran of the Army Special Forces. And I think to myself, whoa. I said, this is either going to be really bad or really good.
Yeah.
He says, I'm an 18-year veteran of the Army Special Forces. And a long pause. And he says, and I'd be honored to serve with any one of you guys.
Wow.
The audience erupts in applause, standing ovation.
Wow. I
start crying. Amazing. And the guy I was worried about gets up and walks out.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. One other call to duty story that's significant in the whole Don't Ask, Don't Tell issue has to do with the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, John Shalikashvili. At the time Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being considered, General Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He retired, and John Shalikashvili was a Mustang, probably the first Mustang chairman of the Joint Chiefs, probably ever, became the commanding general, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Okay. Turns out that General Shalikashvili lived about 5 miles from where we lived in Washington State. Oh. And I found this out because I had been going to PFLAG meetings in Tacoma, and one of the people I was driving with was a retired Marine colonel whose son was gay and was going to PFLAG, and he was a friend of the Shalikashvilis. I just about jaw dropped. I said, wow. I said, can you get me a meeting with General Shalikashvili? Yeah. He said, sure. So, okay. So I go to his house with the colonel, and we're sitting in the living room, and General Shalikashvili is recovering from a stroke that he'd had. And he's fascinated by the story. He listened to my talk about what's going on with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and here's my presentation. And my entire goal with General Shalikashvili was to keep the conversation going. Yeah. Have a one one-time meeting. And I think one of the salient things he said to me, two salient things he said to me that I remember was, he said, I can see your point of view from the civilian standpoint, but when I put on my general hat, when I wear my chairman of the Joint Chiefs cover,
Sure.
I think about what Open the Gay service is going to be. And I can't get there yet. Okay, so there was that.
Yeah.
The other thing he said was of significance. One of the reasons we can never have Open the Gay military is because of submarines. The submarine community is very close-knit. They're under the water, close. It was all-male crews at the time.
Yeah.
All-male crew under the water for 3 months at a time, close quarters, the old shower issue kind of thing. Says, we can't do that. What General Shalikashvili didn't know was that one of my call to duty members was a current active duty submarine sailor.
Really?
Yes. Who is about as, what's the word I can use, masculine as you could possibly be.
Sure. So
I asked General Shalikashvili if we could have another conversation. Sure, come back anytime. So I came back again with Dixon Osborne this time, the head of Service Management Legal Defense Network. And so Dixon and he had a conversation, and of course, Dixon's not military, he's a civilian, he's a lawyer.
Yeah.
But I could see, just listening to General Shalikashvili talk, I could see him moving closer to our position.
Sure.
So then I asked him again as I left, I said, can I come back again? Sure.
Wow.
Came back a third time with Aaron Belkin from the Palm Center. So Aaron, of course, knows the whole military history from an academic standpoint of this.
Yeah.
Gaze on the military issue. And Aaron is a professor, but again, from the general standpoint, civilian, non-military, professor, academic, it's really not combat on the ground kind of thing. But Aaron can be pretty persuasive, and I could see he scored some points with the general. So when we left, I asked him one more time, could we come back? And he said, sure. This time I brought the Call to Duty tour with me.
Wow.
So we had Alex and Jared Chapowski, who was just gotten out of, no, actually, no. Jared and two of the guys on the tour were still active duty. They were both about to get out from the Army at Fort Lewis, where I was living, but they were still on active duty, so they were absolutely terrified.
Yeah, what a risk.
And so we had to have some ground rules set up. So we came to an agreement. I came to an agreement with the general. Nothing that's said in that room will be revealed.
Sure.
Right, so that they could feel safe and be open about their discussion. And then we had the submarine sailor I brought with us. So the general already knew my story, so we started going around the room with each of them telling their stories and what their experience was in the various places. And some of them had been in Iraq and in combat in Iraq. And one of the questions that General Shalikashvili asked me was, I thought it was an odd question. I asked all of them. I thought it was an odd question. He said, what was your father's reaction when you told him you were gay?
Okay.
That's an interesting, completely out of the blue, has nothing to do with, but that,
Right.
I never really figured out why. Of course, I wasn't going to ask him why he asked that question, but that was an interesting question.
Yeah, interesting.
And then you got to the submarine sailor, the submariner. And the two of them had this almost private conversation for 30 minutes. He was telling the general what life is like on a submarine, and that everybody, there's no secrets on a submarine.
Yeah.
Everybody knows he's gay. Nobody cares. You're judged by how you do your job and how well you're going to keep your shipmates alive.
Yeah.
In this nuclear submarine.
Right.
And because of the command obviously knew too.
Right.
So this guy is openly gay submariner. telling. General
Right.
was really,
How powerful.
yeah, it was extremely powerful.
Wow.
So that meeting went on for probably 2 hours. It was an amazing meeting.
Wow.
And it had an impact. So we left. The door was open again. I didn't come back a fifth time. I thought we'd already made our points. But I think it had a major impact because Aaron Belkin subsequently asked, I'd say maybe 6 months later, General Shalikashvili, if he would write an op-ed about whether we could revisit Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Wow.
And the general said, yes.
Wow.
And he said, help me write it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, help me write it, he said. So Aaron and I put our heads together and we gave him a draft, and I put a little paragraph in there about openly gay submariner.
Sure.
They made it into the op-ed. And so General Shalikashvili liked what he read. He made a few changes, added some stuff of his own, and submitted it to the New York Times, and they published it.
Wow.
So here was a major event in the history of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The
Right.
former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was tasked with implementing Don't Ask, Don't Tell,
Right.
putting it into effect, now says he thinks the country has progressed enough.
Yeah.
We can do this, and we should revisit the issue.
Wow.
It was like a nuclear bomb going off on the issue. It was amazing, because what it did was now empower all those senior officers who probably agreed but didn't dare speak out publicly.
Right.
He allowed them to do so
Right.
by putting this op-ed out there. So that was a huge landmark event when he pushed his op-ed, when he published his op-ed. Okay.
So, sir, I want to. You are such a fantastic and engaging storyteller. We're already at 47 minutes.
Right?
So I do want to get to your work on the commission in regards to transgender service members.
Okay. Yep.
So sorry, I don't mean to.
No problem.
Everybody, I'm seeing the comments here, and everybody is really loving these stories.
The transgender is a very important issue. So, just one little minute of preamble. Transgender was never part of the issue of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It wasn't written into the law. Probably was a good thing.
Yeah.
The worst was that the American public didn't understand what transgender was. In fact, the opposition, the conservative Christians, the Republicans would always bring up transgender issue to point it as a horrible thing, and that's what would happen to the military if you allow gays and lesbians to serve.
Sure.
That was kind of the background to it, but we were fortunate that it wasn't part of the law. So when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, we then began to work on transgender. Aaron Belkin in particular worked hard on it. And the prohibition against transgender members serving was all medical. It was simply written into the medical regulations, and it was ancient medical history. It was poor medicine. It was misunderstood medicine. So we attacked those medical standards, and we got the American Medical Association to agree with us. We got the American Psychological Association to agree with us.
Wow.
That these were ancient standards, and they were no longer applicable. Our understanding of hormones, our understanding of sexuality has advanced way beyond when these things were written, probably back in the 50s, 1950s. Right. And so we were able to convince President Obama, really, who was the president at the time, and his Defense Department, that it's not going to be a big deal.
Right.
And so on the basis of changing the medical regs, transgender members were allowed to serve. It was a major victory. And we didn't have to go through all this 10 years of struggle against a law that required both houses of Congress to act. So I won't say it was easy.
Right. And that was just purely the standards to, join the service and be in the service. And just the medical regulations were then what you were able to change. Right.
And of course, there are, what do we think, 15,000 transgender members already serving? I mean, it was, and so it was amazing. So we had that victory that lasted, of course, until the current commander-in-chief did it, changed it by tweet.
By tweet.
So, Now, so okay, that's not the end of the story. So now you had the Pentagon virtually being directed to
Right.
look at the medical standards, and they, I won't say they, a paper was published in their name that the Pentagon endorsed.
Okay.
That talked about all the problems that transgender people will pose from a financial standpoint or from a combat readiness standpoint, and that's so they had to. So basically, they had to justify the commander-in-chief's tweet that transgender can't insert. So they did. One of my great disappointments with General Mattis, who was the defense secretary at the time, was he defended that. He defended that in the Senate hearing. I was really appalled.
Yeah,
to do that. I to this day don't understand why, because I can't imagine he believed anything in that policy statement. The only thing I can speculate on, this is pure speculation on my part, was that he was threatened with his budget.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the Defense Department budget was coming up for approval. Probably. Again, I have no proof.
Sure.
So you go along with this and we'll give you what you want in your budget. So here you've got the poor General Mattis is stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Sure.
You know, he had to go along with it. So after they published their position paper, I was one of the co-authors that on a paper that the Palm Center put out, what I think your members would probably like to read. It's a point-by-point refutation of that Pentagon policy paper. It was written primarily, I think, by Nathaniel Frank, who is a professor at NYU, of the Palm Center, is a major ally for us. And I can make that available to you guys. I have a copy of it on my computer. I can just give it to you, and you can.
That would be awesome. We can put it in our resource library on our website. That would be amazing.
Yeah, sure. That's actually on the Palm Center website. I mean, you can read this, and it's really, you know.
Okay.
So that, but before we get off that issue, let me show you a few resources your members probably interested in.
Yeah, definitely.
This is Nathaniel Frank's book.
Unfriendly Fire, Nathaniel Frank. I'm going to put these things in the, I can like put them in the comments. So.
This is the definitive history of Don't Ask, Don't Tell from an academic standpoint. The best resource you'll ever find anywhere. Goes up the whole military history right up to repeal. It stops before repeal happened. So that's one book I recommend. Another book I recommend to your members is Alex Nicholson's book, Fighting to Serve. Alex takes it from repeal, you know, tells you how repeal came about. Behind the scenes stuff, what happened, what was going on in the White House and Congress and whatnot. And then there's two movies that are really good. One is an HBO special called The Strange History of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
And I watched that one, and I highly recommend that to everybody. If you have Amazon Prime, HBO, you can literally stream it right after this. So
it's a good summary, and it takes you through repeal.
Yeah.
And then the second one is a video from independent films called Ask Not. Johnny Simons traveled with us on the Call of Duty tour, so there's a lot of Call of Duty tour in there. This one's a more personal. This one has lots of personal stories, a lot of, you know, as opposed to the first one. I'm in there. You'll get to see Fred Fox talk in Georgia and other places. So you'll see the squad of Army people run by with their fag chant, and that's all in there. So anyway. Okay, just wanted to get those out to your members.
Yeah, and just so everybody watching knows, I tried to locate that video online today. It seems like it's very hard to find online. If you do find a way to stream it, definitely let us know on the CG Spectrum inbox. But otherwise, I'm hoping to work something out to maybe have like a showing of it later on.
I can call up Johnny Simon. I know Johnny Simon, so I can call up Johnny and say, Johnny, can I get a copy of this for Coast Guard Spectrum?
That would be amazing. Wow, that would be awesome.
They'll do.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So now going back to the regulations, you know, obviously we have this trans ban effectively right now. And you were kind of speaking about this outdated kind of medical standards. And so one thing that when I was reading through the medical standards for joining the military that I saw was something that I was kind of confused about its significance. So when I read it, it basically effectively bans intersex people from joining the military. And for everybody watching, the actual the wording is this is under the, I believe, under the female genitalia section within the medical standards. It says history of major abnormalities or defects of genitalia, such as hermaphroditism, pseudo-hermaphroditism, or pure gonadal dysgenesis. So are you able to give any insight into why those issues would affect someone's service?
They don't. Those are old terms, old languages, existing from the 50s. We try after we won the victory with transgender. We started again. Aaron started on intersex. We started down that path, and then tweet basically blew everything up. So there's just no way. I mean, so we had to stop. There's not going to, there's no way change other than a change in administration, then start again. But yeah, I mean, it's ancient language. There's really no reason.
Sure.
It's not going to affect anybody's ability to serve. I mean, so if you're asking me, is there any justification for it? In my opinion, no.
Okay, yeah, that was basically what I was looking for, was what is the, I have no medical knowledge. So, but when I read that, and for what the knowledge I do have around intersex issues, it seemed like this was something that I couldn't see actually affecting someone's ability to serve in the military. So
yeah, fortunately, again, it's a regulation. It's not a law, so it can be changed with the stroke of a pen of the commander-in-chief.
Sure.
Your defense.
Sure, that's good to know. Would you be we only have 3 minutes left. Would you be willing to go a little bit over an hour, sir? Yes. There's a lot of questions here. And I think you are just such a wealth of knowledge. So
on the transgender issue, by the way, of course, we all are aware of the Coast Guard Commandant's comments after that tweet, right? I mean, he basically said, "I welcome the service of our transgender members." He's the only one.
Right.
So let's give some kudos there.
Right. Yeah. Now that you bring that up, I do recall that. And so when you were a part of this study on the transgender issue specifically, what was the process then to get the regulations? Like you guys put out your study, and then the, I guess, top leadership, the Joint Chiefs, whoever it was, saw this, and then they discuss it, and then they say, "Hey, let's change this," or how does that kind of work?
I can't say that it was our study that did it. I mean, you had the AMA and others.
Yes, sure.
But I think basically they were directed to.
Okay.
The White House. I mean, it's they're following orders, so the Pentagon basically make this happen. There's really no reason.
Sure.
Hide your medical regulations because they're kind of ancient history.
Sure.
So that's what happened. I don't know. We were just a piece of this. And it's the same with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I mean, I was just a small part. There were thousands of people that worked. Spent a decade or more of their lives making this happen. But that was what we did with the Palm Center. It was just a small piece of how the transgender ban came to be removed.
Right.
By the way, of course, they grandfathered in our transgender members, right? But they also put a little, I don't know if people are aware of this, there's a little threat that goes along with that.
Right.
If you make a big deal out of the fact that you're still able to serve, you're going to change our minds.
Right.
Somewhere I read that. I wish I could put my hands on that document, but there was a kind of a veiled threat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of similarities in some ways to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, in that some of these, yes, you're grandfathered in, but you're kind of muzzled a bit in that. So, okay, I'm going to bring Lieutenant Junior Grade Caleb Taverdi on as well. He's been collecting all of the questions that we've had, so we're going to bring him in now and have him ask some of the questions from the audience then, or the viewers.
Okay.
Caleb, can you hear us? Okay, Caleb, here, let me unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for all of this,
I don't
Mr.
hear
Steinman. Really, really enlightening and means a lot. And I think really shows us that progress is possible, because sometimes it doesn't feel that way. So the first question from the audience is, it's a little bit, it's not super long, but I'll just read it, and then we can come back to any parts that may get convoluted a bit. So the Coast Guard recently did a RAND women's study that didn't desegregate data by race or gender identity. It assumed a binary construct. Currently, the Coast Guard is working with RAND on a URM study, but again, does not separate gender identity or sexual orientation. Do you have any recommendations on how? Oh, wow, there it is. Do you have any recommendations of how we can conduct a study for basically the queer Coast Guard community, since the Coast Guard does not seem to want to fund it, and the DoD has done one and funded an LGBTQ study in 2016?
That's a tough one. Yeah, to do a study like that, you definitely need funding, and you're going to need the Commandant's endorsement of it as well, because you have to do a service-wide study, right? So I'm not sure I'd have a recommendation on how to make that happen. I don't know what the current Commandant's position is on this issue, so it's unusual for a Coast Guard to do a study like this outside the DoD. Usually we're included with a DoD study. So doing a separate study from the Coast Guard would require, yeah, you definitely have the Commandant's endorsement, the Office of Personnel's endorsement to do it, and then the funding to create a survey.
Sure.
So you're going to have an ally somewhere high up in Coast Guard headquarters to begin to make this happen.
Sure. And the DoD study, I will, for the people watching, I will put the link to that study in the CG Spectrum page. And Mr. Steinman, I think maybe you had checked it out, or I'd shared some of the, it was USC was given the, I think in conjunction with UCLA maybe, the task of looking at kind of integration of LGBT members post Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Right.
So there's a number of papers that have come out from that research, but it was just DoD branches, not Coast Guard for some reason being included in that. Yeah, which is definitely unfortunate, and unfortunate that we weren't included in this underrepresented minorities study. We were just on a call today and asked if in the kind of they're going to be sending out a survey to the entire active duty Coast Guard, and we asked if there was going to be any sort of option for other when selecting gender, or if there's going to be, anything that even kind of hinted at the LGBTQ community, and it was a resounding no. So that is very unfortunate, but we have been told that the topic has been tabled for future discussion. So
there you
we
go.
look forward to that future discussion. All right, Caleb, I'm going to hide this question, and we can go on to the next one.
Okay, great. Yeah. I think piggybacking off of that, we really are just trying to make as much noise as we can.
That gives you your answer there. So
yeah. So
anyway, yeah. I mean, I can comment on that. I mean, so there's politics, and like we talked about before, there's politics involved. There's probably budgetary considerations involved. So it's unfortunate. So
it is.
Yeah, so for the future.
For the future. That's what we're here for. We're here to fight for the future. So.
Yep.
All right. So the next question is, was there, during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell period or prior to that, was there a quiet or secret network of queer folks that you could tune into, So kind of maybe like a secret group, so to speak? If so, what was that like?
So was there a secret network? Nothing formal, but there certainly existed. I mean, there was, tens of thousands of gays and lesbians serving. Of course, they knew, they know each other. I wasn't part of any of it, so I can't specifically address your question. I was, deep in the closet, of course, as a flag officer. So, you can imagine.
Yeah.
So there were, well, I can say one thing is that there were chat rooms, that military chat rooms for gays and lesbians, and that's how I met my husband, as a matter of fact. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So there's a funny story about that, but we'll say that for another time. So that's one way people communicate with each other. And that's another way of dating too.
Sure. Wow.
But other than the chat rooms, I was unaware of anything.
Right. I think that it really does add another layer, the politics of being a flag officer. And honestly, just an officer in general, there's, from my perspective, there does seem to be a lot of politicking that you have to do to some degree if you want to reach a certain level. And so, of course, like when you're not allowed to be openly gay, and if you're trying to advance your career, like you're going to be as deep in the closet as you can, I would imagine, at least, because you don't want to risk your career. So that's very fair. All right, let's do maybe one more, Caleb.
Yeah, there's one more question. So the next question is, speaking about Coast Guard Spectrum, since we're a new group, and kind of paralleling to your early days with the tours, what are some recommendations that you have for us moving forward in terms of, making inroads, fighting opposition, and just being, I guess, loud and kind of what we were talking about before?
Yeah, so you all have this major advantage that you can be out. You can be out and proud and have the backing of the commandant's office. I mean, to me, it's stunningly amazing that Coast Guard Spectrum can exist. So I would just encourage you to tell your stories, tell your personal stories, and don't be afraid to do that, because the more people see you and hear you, you will be changing their hearts and minds, because you are real living examples of what you're trying to have our rest of our society achieve. So, I salute all of you for that. It's amazing to me that you guys can exist as an endorsed organization. So I would just, tell your stories as loud and as often as you can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to give us truly so much knowledge and such great history. I really do appreciate it. My last two things are, one, I made a joke when we were, offline about how all OSs are gay. You brought up the Arabic linguist, and my major in college was Arabic. And then going back to some Mariners, the first year I was stationed here in New York, I went to this drag show in Brooklyn, met a drag queen who had just done a tour on a submarine. She had just they had just gotten out of active duty Navy, and there you go. So that's a little tie-in there. And yeah, I just, once again, really appreciate it. And if anybody has other questions that we didn't get to, we will definitely send them to Mr. Steinman to have him give his insight. And thank you all for watching. And I believe this broadcast will be staying up on the YouTube channel. So if you're coming in late and you want to watch it from the beginning, it'll be up there for a while. So Caleb, thank you as well for helping me with this, and have a fantastic evening and happy Pride to everybody. So
Thank you.
thank you so much, sir.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.